In this tutorial, we will learn to use the direct selection tool, the basic features of the pen tool, how to transform a hard angular corner into a curve, and another method for modifying the stroke known as the variable width profile. We will also cover a couple of core functionalities of Illustrator, specifically the concept of an open versus a closed path. To start, open the monkey face file we were previously working on. Our monkey currently lacks all character and may as well have had a lobotomy. We're going to use the tools we learn in this tutorial to make our monkey more expressive. First, we need to open a file and experiment with the tools on a blank artboard before we move on to our image. So please open a new file. So we're going to begin by drawing a rectangle of an arbitrary size. If you don't remember, the letter M is the quick key in order to select the rectangle tool. And so I'm just going to click and drag and create a rectangle of any size. It doesn't matter. Make it big enough so it's easy for you to work with. And then let's change the fill color to yellow. And we're going to change the stroke color to red. All right, we're going to make this the McDonald's rectangle. And then let's take the stroke width and let's set that to 8 points. That's just going to make it heavy enough that we can see it, and being able to see the stroke for this demo is important. So now that we've created a rectangle, we're going to learn how to use the direct selection tool to modify it freely. The direct selection tool is the white arrow right up here next to the black arrow that is the selection tool. The direct selection tool, you'll see the quick key is the letter A. I highly suggest learning that quick key because you're going to be switching back and forth between selection tool and direct selection tool frequently when you're creating your artwork. These are two of the most used tools in Illustrator. So if I hit the letter A or click here, I can get the quick key up, and you'll notice immediately that there are some slight changes in how the bounding box is displayed. So if I hit the letter V, which is the quick key for the select tool, you can see that those changes happen. One of the biggest is there's these little these dots with circles around them in the corners. We're not going to talk about those yet, but we will before the end of the tutorial. And then you'll also notice that all of the corners, all of those anchor points are filled in, right? They're solid blue. That means that they are selected, right? So currently all 4 anchor points are selected. So if I click and drag with the direct selection tool, it's actually going to work exactly like the selection tool. It's going to move the entire shape around the page. Now, that's not very useful. But what is useful is if I go and click on one corner, one anchor point, you'll notice that the other 3 are now open, right? They have a white fill rather than a solid blue fill. That means that these 3 are deselected and this one corner is selected. So now I can click and drag on this corner and I can move it anywhere around the page. I can make this into any shape that I want. All right, so now I can click on another corner. All right, I can pull that in. I can grab this corner here. All right, really, you can just click and drag and grab this thing anywhere. Now, the other thing you can do with the direct selection tool is you can actually grab the line segment between 2 points. So if I know I want to pull this line up towards the top of the page, I can click on it and pull the entire line up so it's still at the same angle. I don't have to grab one corner and then the other. Right, so I can do that with any side that I've got here. Again, I can just very quickly grab each and any one of these corners and move it around. Okay, so now what I'd like you to do is bring this thing in to something of a V shape. Right, with these points somewhat centered, somewhat aligned. We're just going to get it something close. So we get this like fat V shape. It kind of looks like the Pontiac logo. Now, something that is really challenging to do is to get these lines, these parts to be aligned perfectly, right? Getting this the same distance from the center point as this one is hard to do without some sort of guide. And Illustrator actually incorporates guides. And though with the monkey, we're not being super precise and we're not going to use guides, this is a great time to show you how to use guides and why they're useful. So in order to turn guides on, there's one step that we have to do, which is actually to turn on the rulers. And the rulers, if you go up to the very top of the screen and go to the View menu and go down to Rulers and Show Rulers, you'll get these rulers. And this ruler these are both in pixels, right? So you'll see the edge of the artboard starts at 0 pixels here, and all the way over here is also 0 pixels. You know, these are negative pixels, doesn't really matter. And we're not super concerned with these marks at all. All we're going to do is we need to be able to create guides. And in order to create guides, you need the rulers here, because what you do to create a horizontal guide is you hover your mouse over the ruler at the top of the screen and click and drag down, and you'll see this dashed line starts coming down. And for this, I'm not going to be super precise. I'm just going to, whichever one of these points it hits first, say somewhere in here, I'm going to drop the guide near that point. And you'll see the guide comes up, it's this cyan blue line. Now, you can leave the guides on and visible, and they will not show up when you print your artwork. These are just totally something that appears on the screen in Illustrator, but is not ever a permanent part of your artwork. So to do a vertical guide, you do the same thing. You just go over to the left side of the screen, inside the ruler, click and drag, and we can start to bring these out. Now I'm going to pull this one over, and I'm actually going to leave it off center a little bit just so we can recenter it here in a second. So these tools, or these guides, work exactly like other objects in Illustrator. If I click on one, I can select it, and in order to do that, I'm currently using the direct selection tool. I need to use the selection tool, so I'm going to hit the letter V and change to my selection tool, and then I'm going to click on the guide again. Now currently what I should be able to do is when I click on this, it should turn dark blue, and then I should be able to click and drag and move it around. However, that's not happening. So what I need to do is I need to unlock the guides. Currently, because the last time I was using this software, probably because I was doing a demo or practicing for this demo, I left the guides locked. And Illustrator remembers that. So whenever you restart the software, it's going to remember that last state. Now, if you're on the computers in this lab, if you log out of your account and log back in, it basically restarts the computer from scratch, right? It's like it re-images the hard drive. So it will not remember those settings. But if you're on your personal computer, it's going to remember that you locked the guides the last time you used Illustrator. So to unlock them, we need to go back up to View at the top of the screen. And then we're going to go down to Guides and uncheck Lock Guides just by clicking on it. Now that I've done that, I can click on these guides, and when I move my mouse off of it, you'll see that the selected guide becomes a darker blue color. So I'm going to select the vertical guide, and you'll see up at the top here I have the X value, right? That's the position in pixels from this side over, right? It's at 518 pixels. We want that to be right in the middle of the page, and this is 1,000 pixels wide, so I'm going to change this to 500. And hit enter, and you'll see that it nudges over. And so now that I've made that move, I'm going to use my direct selection tool, the letter A, and I'm going to select these 2 points independent of one another and drag them until they snap to that line, right? And by default, snapping to guide should be turned on. All right, so I've got this one centered. Now, the other thing, as I said, guides work like normal objects. So if I hit the letter V for the selection tool, and I select my guide, and then if I hold down the Option or Alt key, you'll see I get the same icon that's telling me I can duplicate this. And when I click and drag, it's going to make the guide disappear, but if I click and drag this over here somewhere and release it, as soon as I release Option and the mouse button, this guide reappears. And so now what I want to do is I want this to be split in quarters, right? So I have this set to 500. So this guide I'm going to come up here and I'm going to set to 750. And then I'm going to duplicate this center guide one more time by selecting it, holding down Option and clicking and dragging. And then I'm going to change this. I got pretty close on that. I'm going to change that to 250. And now that I've got these guides set, I'm going to grab each of these corners independently and pull them up until they reach these points where they intersect. So I'm going to hit the letter A so I can use direct selection. Click on one anchor, snap it into the corner, click on the other anchor, and snap it into this corner. So now I've created something that's uniform, it's symmetrical. And I've done it pretty quickly. Now I could say, oh, I want this to actually be a certain number of pixels down from this guide, or the same for this point, but I'm pretty happy with the shape that I've got now, right? These 2 points don't really matter as long as yours looks visually similar to what we've got going on here. It'll work for the next step in our demo. Okay, so we're done using our guides for the time being. So what we need to do is we need to hide them, because we could get rid of them, but let's say we might need to use them again. Maybe we're going to make another shape that we want to fit in these same dimensions. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go to View, Guides, and Hide Guides. Right? And now the guides are still there. They're just out of our way. We don't need to worry about them any longer. Up until this point, we've only dealt with either objects that have straight lines and hard corners or ellipses. We haven't dealt with anything that makes a mix of those two things. And there are plenty of shapes such as a heart, which this looks kind of like already, where you need hard corners in certain places and nice curves in other places. And so I'm going to show you how to start mixing those things to create these more complex objects. So to start with, we're going to select not just one, but we're actually going to select two anchors with the direct selection tool. So if I already have one selected, then just like if I'm selecting multiple objects, I hold down the Shift key and I click on this anchor point. And so now I have two anchor points that are solid blue and two anchor points that are open. And now what I need to do is I need to take these and transform them from hard corners into curves. And there's a couple ways I can do that. The first way I can do it is up here at the top. I have in the toolbar, I've got anchor points selected, and so these are some of the options that I have when I'm using anchor points. And the first two are convert, right? This says convert selected anchor points to corner. We already have hard corners. This one says convert selected anchor points to smooth. If I click on this one, it's going to automatically turn these 2 points that I had selected into curves while it's leaving hard corners here and here. Now, there's one other way we can do this, and we'll discuss that a little bit later. But this is a good start. So we've got these two corners, they're curves, but this looks nothing like a heart, right? Or it's like a really bad heart that an 8th grader would draw, for his Valentine for his girlfriend or something like that. So what we need to do is we actually need to modify the way these curves are shaped. And to do that, we're going to do this independently. I'm going to select one anchor point at a time. And as soon as I click on one of these anchor points, you're going to see these blue lines extending out from either side. These lines are called handles, and they're what allow us to modify the shape of this curve. So if I click on one of these handles and drag, you'll notice that by rotating this, I can, do all sorts of horrible things to this curve, right? I can change the shape of this curve. The other thing I can do is by pulling this handle out away from this, I make the curve harder and harder. Essentially what I'm doing is if I was to pull this handle all the way in until it's right on top of the path, then it's going to be a straight line, right? It's the shortest distance between 2 points. And the further away this handle goes, and I can go really, really far away, it's going to be pushing this curve further and further away from the most direct route, right? It's making a stronger and stronger curve. So let me pull this back down so I can actually recenter this. Now the pulling out, the rotation is all uniform, right? It's rotating both sides of the curve around the anchor point. But the handles here, stretching this, is something that's done independently on each side. So I'm going to pull this side out. I'm going to pull this side down a little bit. And I can tell already that because of the way this curve is made, I actually want this point to be a little bit further down, because then that's going to make this much more uniform heart-shaped curve. And so now to mirror this on the other side, I'm going to grab this anchor point and I'm going to pull this down, and hopefully maybe I can find uniformity there. I might actually have to go in and modify my guides in order to get this aligned, but I'm not super concerned about getting it perfectly aligned right now because this is a demo and I'd rather do this quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this out a touch, pull this guy down, maybe tweak this out. This probably needs to come down even a little bit further. And this is starting to look like a much more convincing and full heart. Right now, there is no easy way for me to mirror the settings I do on one side as far as this curve is considered with the settings I've done on the other. There are ways where you could actually draw half a heart and then we can copy and paste it and mirror it around the center and then join those together, but that's for another demo. So for right now, I'm happy with this. If you want to pause the video, you could go and get some more practice with the guides and actually bring more guides down here to figure out what you want your maximum width to be and your maximum height. And then you could make your curves conform to those dimensions. And that way you're going to get two curves that are going to be equal on both sides of the heart. So now that we've introduced how to draw or how to do some basic manipulations on anchor points and turn them into curves, we're going to move this heart off to the side. So use your selection tool and just click and drag and get it out of there. And we're going to move on to using the pen tool. Now the pen tool is this icon here. It looks like the old tip or nib of a fountain pen. And so I'm going to click on this once. And you'll notice that my icon has changed, so it looks again like the icon on the screen. And you'll see it has an asterisk next to it. That means that currently we're going to be starting a new shape or a new path as soon as we click our mouse. And the way you draw with the pen is you click, and we're going to start with drawing a simple polygon shape. So click once and it'll drop an anchor point. Click again and it's going to draw a straight line. Hold on a second, let me try this one more time. Click again and it's going to draw a straight line between those 2 points. So let's make a 5-sided object. So I've got 2 points, 3, 4, 5. Now what I'd like you to notice is that our path, our stroke, follows our path all the way along here, but then there is no stroke in this open area here, but the fill fills in the entire shape. This is what's called an open path, right? A closed path or a closed shape means that the path goes completely all the way around and connects every side. An open path is open, right? There's a hole in it. And we can actually, this is actually very useful. The fact that we have the ability to say, I only want a stroke to go here, 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 and here, but I want no stroke on this part is going to come in very handy when we're working on our monkey. But for now, we're actually going to close this shape. And so in order to close this shape, all we have to do is we've clicked 4 more times. We've got this point. You can see this point is the selected point. It's the last point we created. And so I'm going to come over here, and if I just hover over the starting point, a little circle shows up next to the pen nib. And so if I click once, that is going to close the shape. And so now if I use my direct selection tool, or the letter A, I can click here. I can start modifying corners just like I would with any other shape that I'd created with one of the primitives. And I can also use my selection tool and make sure I'm going to click off of this, click on it again. And I can scale this up, I can scale it down, right? I can stretch it, I can rotate this shape. It's exactly like any other shape that we've worked with in the past. We just happen to make this one completely by hand. So now let's go back to the pen tool. And by the way, the quick key for the pen tool is the letter P, as in pen. And we're going to create a new shape. And this time, instead of clicking for each one of the corners, we're going to create curves. And to create a curvilinear shape using the pen tool, you click drag each corner. And so let's do 5 more points again. So I'm going to click drag to start with. And you'll notice this looks like I'm drawing a line, but what this actually is this is the handle for the curve, right? So already, even though there's nothing attached to this anchor point, I'm having the ability to manipulate things about the curve that I can't possibly see or imagine right now. Something that happens often is beginners seem to think that they have to put their next point where the end of this handle is, or they mistake this handle as the line that they're drawing. And that's not the case. So I'm going to release my pen tool, and then I'm going to click and drag one more time. And now you'll see a curve starting to form between these two shapes. And as I move these handles around, that curved line is what's actually going to be drawn by Illustrator. And now I'm going to do 3, 4, and just because I can, 5. And now when I go to close this shape, if I want to have it be a nice, smooth, curvilinear form when it closes as well, I need to click drag this last point as well. So I'm going to click drag, and you'll see I get 2 handles. I can manipulate this entire curve, and I'm going to release it. Now, I've got this great curvilinear shape. Again, I can use my direct selection tool, the letter A. I can come back in here and I can move these points around. I can modify the handles, modify the curves. And so one thing to be aware of when you're using the pen tool, people oftentimes get really frustrated because they're trying to make their shape perfect on the first go. And what's most important when you're using the pen tool, at least when you're starting out, once you get a little bit better, you learn how it works and you get a little bit more control on it. But when you're starting out, just getting the points down in the right place to have enough points to make the curves that you want to make is the biggest issue, because you can always go back in and modify these. And we can actually even add more points, which we'll talk about in a minute. Let's say that I'm going to go ahead and select this object. I'm going to click on it once and then click drag to get it off the page. Let's say that we start drawing a shape, and this happens a lot. We start drawing a shape, and for some reason we decide, oh, I really need to move one of these points before I go any further. And so we use the direct selection tool, and we grab one of these points, move it however much, and now we're like, oh no, I need to finish this shape. How am I going to do that? In order to do that, you use the letter P for pen, right? You can click on the icon up here too. You're going to hover over the point, the last point in your line, and when you do that, you'll see you get this slash symbol next to the icon. That means that when you click on this, it's going to continue this shape from where you left off. So I'm going to click drag to make sure I keep going curvilinear. I'm going to click drag again so I can add one more point, and then click drag one more time. And now I've completed this shape. Right? So you can draw part of your curve and then come back in and complete it later. Okay. With this one, because we're getting a lot of shapes on here that we're not going to use, I'm going to delete this. Now, the last thing with the pen tool we need to go over is that you don't just have to do a curvilinear shape or a shape with hard corners. You can actually make a complex shape that has hard corners and curvilinear shapes. And so we're going to make a really rudimentary drawing of a cloud. And to do that, we're going to, again, use the pen tool. And I'm going to start down here. The cloud is going to basically be lumpy, lumpy, lumpy around here with a flat bottom. So I'm going to click and drag my starting point, and then I'm going to click drag to make the first hump. And then to come back in, right, where I'm going to bounce back out into another hump, I'm just going to click once. And then when I get to the top where I want the top of this hump to be, I'm going to click and pull, click and drag. And then you'll notice as I'm clicking and dragging, you can see what the fill's doing, right? It's wherever the first point and the last point are, it's trying to draw the path of the shortest length between those 2 points. And so now I'm going to come down here, and I'm just going to click once because this is an interior point. I'm going to come back up here, click drag. I'm going to come down here, click once because it's an interior point, come out here, click drag. This is a beautiful, aka terrible cloud, but that's okay. And then I'm going to come down here, click drag, and then I'm going to come back over here, and to finish it I'm just going to click once, right? Because I want this line to be straight. So I'm just going to click once to finish this cloud. Now, this cloud is kind of nightmarish, right? But because I can use the direct selection tool, I can very quickly modify the shape of this cloud to how I want it. So if I hit the letter A, I can click on this anchor point and then click drag, maybe make that a little bit less crazy, pull these guys out a little bit too, pull this guy out, and things are starting to look a little bit better. It looks really cartoony, which is fine by me. I'm not in a huge rush. And there's a couple things I'm going to do right now to actually make some issues apparent with this thing. And so just bear with me a second while I do this, because we're going to fix these issues later, but I just want you to see them because it's something that if it happens to you while you're working on a project and you don't know how to fix it, it's really, really aggravating. So what I'm doing is you'll see that this corner is truncated, right? It doesn't point out. And this corner shoots way beyond that anchor point. And we're not going to fix it right now, but we'll fix it here in a little bit. So one other thing the pen tool allows you to do is it allows you to add and subtract points from a curve. So let's say we've made this curve and we're like, oh, oops, I actually want another lump right up here for some reason. It's like I want a wart on top of my cloud. And to do that, I'm going to hit P. And something you need to know is that in order to add points to a line, the object has to be in some way selected. Right now I've used direct selection. I have this anchor point selected, but that means that it's connected to this path, right? And so anytime I hover over here, you'll see I get this plus sign if my cursor is over the path, right, where it's at. Whereas if I come up here, I get the asterisk, right? Even though I'm floating right over the path of this object, I get an asterisk, which means if I click here, it's not actually going to add a point to this line. It's going to start drawing a new path, which isn't what we want. So you want to make sure that if you're using the pen tool and you're wanting to add points, you want to have this object selected. You can either select it with the selection tool or the direct selection tool. It doesn't matter as long as it's selected in some way. So to make this hump, I already have this point here, so I'm going to add 2 more points, one on either side. So when that little plus sign shows up, that means I can add a point to a path, so I'm going to click. I'm going to come over here, click, and I've added my 2 points. Now I need to move this point out, move this point up a bit, so I'm going to hit the letter A to grab my direct selection tool, select this point, and pull it up. Now, something you may have noticed is that these anchor points are automatically curves. They're automatically smoothed, right? Even though I only clicked once, because they were on a curve, Illustrator automatically makes them curved points. If they were on a straight line, they would automatically be hard corners. So I've got this thing. Maybe I want to make this balloon out a little bit, but you'll notice that these corners are rounded, right? They're not the hard corners that I've got in here. And that makes this not visually contiguous with the rest of the object. So I'm actually going to zoom in. And to zoom, remember, you can hold down Command or Control plus to zoom in. You can also hold down Option or Alt and use the scroll wheel on your mouse, right, to zoom in. And so I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see what's going on here. And then I'm going to click on one of these anchor points. And Illustrator has a means of allowing you to bend this corner over, right? To break the continuity of this curve at this anchor point. And to do that, you hold down Option or Alt. And when you get the little plus sign, when you're hovering over the end of the handle, you click and drag. And now I've popped that around. And I can do the same on the other side. I'm going to hold down Option, get the plus sign there, click, drag, and now I've broken that point too. And now I have something that when I zoom out, it looks visually much more similar to the rest of these humps. Now you can also subtract points using the pen tool. So I'm going to go ahead and hit P on the pen tool. And let's say I want to get rid of this lump. If at first you might think, oh, if I use the direct selection tool and select a point and hit delete, that'll work. However, that does not work. It deletes the point and actually breaks or opens the path, right? We want to keep the path closed and we want the curves and things to play nicely and be uniform. So I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to hit the letter P to grab the pen tool. And if I hover over an existing anchor point on the path, you'll see that my cursor, the icon, gets a little negative sign next to it. And so if I click on this, it's going to remove that point, but it allows the path to remain continuous. And so let's go ahead and we'll remove this one as well, right? I don't know what we're doing. This actually looks like the silhouette of a cartoon dog with a little tail on it or something. But right, we're able to subtract those points from the line. So now let's go in and let's look at how to fix these issues with the stroke. As you can tell, and if I zoom in again a little bit, let's use the direct selection tool. I'm going to select this point over here. And as I move this handle, right, as I make this corner more or less severe, right? So these two lines are coming together at a steeper and steeper angle, right? This is what I'm doing. At some point, somewhere right around, let's see if I can get this to, boom, somewhere right around there, it goes from shooting way past this point to being truncated. And this one is truncated over here. Now, we don't always have the option of saying, oh, well, I'm just going to adjust my curves until everything is truncated. We need a way to fix this so we either have everything truncated or we have everything conforming nicely to these sharp corners, which would be preferable to me, or there's other options as well. So we've got our objects selected, but we need to use the selection tool to get to the options that will allow us to modify the stroke. And so I'm going to click the letter V to grab my selection tool, and then I'm just going to click once on the object so I have the whole thing selected. So up in the toolbar at the top of the screen, the word stroke is in orange. So this opens the stroke panel. And here we have several options. We can set the stroke weight. There's these options for caps, corners, and how the stroke is aligned. There's also an option to make dashed lines, add arrowheads, and we're going to talk about profile a little bit later. The reason why we're getting these long points in some places and these truncated points in other places is the type of corner we're using, right? So if we hover over this, we're using a miter join is the technical term for the corners that we're using. And this limit, this 10x limit, is essentially saying this is the threshold. If you go above this limit, truncate the end of this thing off. Otherwise, draw the stroke to this sharp corner. So if I increase the limit, let's say to 50, right? Suddenly this thing has this huge long point coming off of it. These stroke points, if your angle is steep enough and your threshold is high enough, will actually shoot through the other side of your object and like off the screen. However, if we reduce the limit, we can reduce this limit to say 2, and now every corner that we've got in here is going to be truncated, right? The lower that number is, the shallower the angle it has to be between those two lines before you're going to get no truncating. Now there's a couple other types of corners you can use. You can also do the round join, which solves the problem in a way. And you can do the bevel join, right? Which again, it just truncates everything. And so if you have a 90-degree corner, it's actually like a 45-degree bevel on the corner of that object. We don't want any of those. We want to actually go back to our miter join. The limit can be 2 or 10. Let's go ahead and just change it back to the default 10. And then the next set of options are the align stroke. Now what this does is by default, the stroke is aligned and it's centered over the path. What we want, if we click on the inside, you'll see we get some crazy action as well. I'm going to use the hand tool actually to show you that, right? So this one's still truncated and this one's shooting way out of nowhere. But if we go up here and we use the align stroke to outside, suddenly our stroke conforms really nicely to the shape that we've drawn. In cases like this where I need the stroke to conform and I really want these corners to be accurate to how I've drawn them, this is the way we need to draw the stroke. Okay, one last thing about the pen tool before we move on. You'll notice that you can actually click on the pen tool and open up these several options. And the quick keys for the add anchor point tool is plus, delete anchor point tool is minus. Those are totally, they just make sense. And then there's the other tool called the anchor point tool, which is so descriptive. The anchor point tool allows us to convert from one type of corner to another. And so if I come to one of these curved corners, and if I just click once, it's going to turn it into a hard corner. If I hover over a hard corner, such as the one that I just made a hard corner, and click drag, it's actually going to turn it into a curve, right? So this is just a really quick way to either make a corner sharp or soft. So one last thing before we move on to the monkey. Remember those little circles, the dots with the circles in the corner, if we use the direct selection tool? So let's click on one of this hard object up here, which hopefully you guys still have, and hit the letter A to get our direct selection tool. So we have all of these dots here. If we click and drag on one of them, you'll see exactly what happens. Yes, it makes rounded corners, and it allows us to we can actually select one or two corners, so we don't have to round all the corners on our object. We can just round two of them and have a few hard corners as well. Now, one thing to note is that this is totally different than when we use the Convert Selected Anchor Points tool. What this does is, rather than create handles on one point, it actually takes our anchor point and splits it in two and makes a nice uniform curve between those 2 points. Wait, this is a new tool that they started maybe a year and a half ago. They introduced it. So let's move on to the monkey. We're going to apply what we've learned to the image of the monkey. So let's go ahead and switch over to our monkey face and process. And we're going to do a couple simple modifications to the face. We're going to add an eyebrow over one of the eyes, and we're going to turn the mouth into a frown. These are going to be some pretty basic additions compared to what we have just done. So first, let's go ahead and do the mouth. We're going to use the direct selection tool. So go up ahead and select it, or hit the letter A. And all we need to do is hover over one of the endpoints, or one of the anchor points on this line segment, and click on it. And then if we just go up to the toolbar at the top of the page and click on the smooth, convert anchor point to smooth, suddenly we have a frown. And I'm just going to grab this handle and pull up just a little bit to make the frown a little bit more frowny. All right, so that was super simple. So now we're going to go ahead and we are going to create the eyebrow. So we're going to use the pen tool. We can hit the letter P on the keyboard. One of the points needs to be up here, and we're going to have a curve that kind of comes down over part of the iris and pupil and comes over here into the center of the face. So for the first point, I'm just going to click once. Right, that just sends an anchor point. It's a hard corner, but what this means is we're only going to have control on one side of our eyebrow, but that's totally fine. Right? For what we're doing, it's super simple. We don't need to do anything else. So with this one, rather than just clicking once, we're going to click and drag, right, to pull these handles out. And then we can shape this to make a little bit of a downturn eyebrow. Now at this point, it's just a line segment overlapping the eye. And so we need to apply an appearance. And the fastest way to do that is to use the selection tool, or the letter V, and just click on our path once so we definitely have the whole thing selected. And then use the eyedropper, and if you remember from the previous tutorial, the eyedropper is just the letter I. We're going to use the eyedropper tool, and we're going to click somewhere here in the head, and that's going to apply the appearance attributes of the head object to this eyebrow. Now you'll notice that right now I've got a good frowny eyebrow, but a bit of the eye is peeking out of the top. And what's nice about this, right, we used an open path. We just have 2 points and it does not connect. So that means we just have this brown area here, which if we adjust these points correctly are going to completely cover up that eye. So I'm going to go ahead and use my direct selection tool again. And I'm going to grab this anchor point, and I might pull this guy up just a touch. There we go. I've completely hidden the eye now. And now if I want this eyebrow to dip a little bit further down into the eye, I can use the handle to pull and stretch this thing, and that top edge is still going to stay up where I want it. So now we've got a downturn eyebrow and a frown of some sort. So what I'd like to do is, I don't like these blunt ends on the ends of my line. I would like to make that a little bit more illustrated looking, right? I don't want my line width to be the same across the entire stroke. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select both of these two things, right? And if you have forgotten how to select two objects, you hold down Shift and click to select the second object. And then once I have those two selected, there's this box up here in the toolbar for the path options called Uniform. And when you hover over it, it says Variable Width Profile. This allows you to change the width of the stroke as it goes from the starting point to the ending point of your path. And you can do this with closed paths, open paths, it doesn't really matter. So the one we're actually going to choose is this width profile 1. That's going to be perfect for what we're doing. But if we click width profile 2 and then click off here in space somewhere, you'll see that the line gets thicker, thinner, and then thicker again. All right, so if we go ahead and change this to the first option, which on my computer for whatever reason vanishes whenever it's hidden, but I know it's the second one down. The first one is the uniform line. I'm going to go ahead and click on that one. And you'll see now we have this line that starts out small, gets fatter, and then gets skinnier again, and the same goes for the eyebrow. Now with the eyebrow, with the way we've got it now, he looks a little upset. But if we were to select that eyebrow and right-click on it, we can go to Transform and go down to Reflect. And depending on where we place this eyebrow, you can already see we can make him actually look sad rather than angry. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy this, right? I've got this set, in case yours isn't set the same way. I have the preview check marked, it's turned on, and I have this set to vertical as the axis that it's reflecting around. And so I'm going to hit copy, and what's that's going to do is it's going to leave the one in place that I have, and it's going to give me another copy. So now I can take this other copy and I can drag it over here and make, a really angry monkey. Or vice versa, we could pull both of these eyebrows around and bring them out a little bit and have a very sad or worried monkey. And there's a tool we haven't really talked about, a different way of manipulating curves that we're going to go ahead and try right now because we've got a great opportunity to do it. So go ahead and use the direct selection tool and select the curve. So I'm going to click on one point here, the one that we didn't use. And so if you notice, when I get my cursor right over the line segment, I get this little arc that shows up. And so if I click on this and bend this, I can actually start to manipulate this point a little bit, right? I could give him a big frown. I could actually make him kind of nervously happy. That's kind of a creepy face, right? I can make him unsure what's happening. So this is just another way that I can manipulate the shape of this curve. I've been using the pen tool for a long time, and I really prefer the control that gives me versus this. There's things that it does really well, but there's other times when it doesn't bend the way I want it to, and so I get a little frustrated with it. In the next tutorial, we're going to put a crown on top of this, well, either sad or angry or grumpy monkey's head.